Kristen Wiig shares the one piece of advice she's carried with her from SNL comedian Will Forte. On Saturday Night Live, Kristen Wiig is sharing some of the best tips she's ever received. Wiig, 52, discussed her time on the venerable variety sketch show on her appearance on former co-star Amy Poehler's podcast, Good Hang, on Tuesday, September 30th. Wiig talked candidly about her sketching process in addition to her performance on the show. When the 54-year-old Poehler was asked how she had the courage to present sketch ideas in the writer's room for the show, Wiig revealed that a piece of advice she received from Will Forte, her former co-star, gave her. In terms of my perspective, Wiig stated, "I suppose I kind of wanted to know where I was in the world. I could sort of hone what kind of works, and what isn't the more I posted things that I found hilarious." In his office, Wiig said, "I do remember Forte telling me once after I said something like, 'I don't know whether Lord would like this.' And he was like, 'Don't do that. Never write for if you believe someone else will find this hilarious,' he says. 'If you find it humorous, write it down.' And I never left that behind." Later, Wiig co-wrote the popular comedy movies Barb and starred go to Vista Del Mar and Bridesmaids. She scored parts in Big Mouth, Palm Royale, Ghostbusters, and numerous other films in addition to starring in both. Regarding getting the SNL part, Wiig was unable to tell Poehler how she got the offer at first, but she later recalled that at first she didn't hear anything. "I was like, I didn't get it," Wiig remarked when the season began. "They said, 'We have a spot for you.' When they phoned me, 'Are you able to visit in 2 weeks?' She came to the show ready and confident to try. What is the job? To try your idiotic ideas," Poehler said about her former co-star. Additionally, the Parks and Recreation star told her guests that every persona Wiig employed in her August 2005 audition, including a notorious Target lady, became a recurring character on the show. The character Sue, who gets a bit too thrilled at surprise parties, was one of Wiig's personal favorites, according to Poehler, even if Target lady was a public favorite. "I cherish her. There are a million reasons why I adore her," Poehler said. "It's hilarious how you portray her. Every time she wears a turtleneck. I like her wig." Sue was a favorite, Wiig acknowledged. "I enjoy drawing in sketches with lots of people and scenes where everyone is looking around and asking, 'What's going on?' I adore that particular moment." Wiig went on, "I adore a cut to Kenan Thompson. I love it the most. If you look at most of my sketches again, I think you have to cut to people being freaked out by me to remind the audience that I'm crazy." Wiig is in her evil phase right now. In Gabby's Dollhouse, the film, which is currently showing in theaters, she plays the quirky, feline antagonist Vera, based on the Netflix children's series. Wiig told people exclusively in September that, in part, she wanted to create a show that her 5-year-old twins, Shiloh and Luna, whom she shares with husband Avi Rothman, could watch. So she said that picking her first role in a children's show was an easy yes. "They're the reason I did it. Naturally, I had a great time working with director Ryan Crego. It was great to make a creative choice for someone other than myself, but I believe he's extremely skilled," Wiig told people. And so, even though they're still in that stage of life where they're trying to understand what I do, I knew that they could watch it. Kristen Wiig's recollection of Will Forte's advice may sound deceptively simple when heard in passing, almost like the kind of friendly reminder one co-worker gives to another in a moment of doubt. Yet as she explained it, and as her career is borne out, those words carried a philosophy of creativity that shaped not only the path she took at Saturday Night Live, but the long stretch of projects and performances that followed. It was advice about comedy, yes, but also about authenticity, about how to face down an audience that may or may not be ready for what you are about to offer. And if we trace her story from those early SNL days through the present, through Bridesmaids and Barb and Star, and the strange assortment of supporting roles and children's projects and surreal characters, what emerges is the portrait of a performer who never abandoned that compass, even when the cultural winds around her shifted in ways that could easily have pushed her off course. To write the conclusion to such a story means to explore what it really means to build a career in comedy, what it means to create in a world obsessed with approval, and why Forte's simple injunction to write what you find funny holds such resonance far beyond the walls of Studio 8H. Wiig's time on Saturday Night Live is the kind of chapter that already feels immortalized in the lore of the show. The cast she joined in 2005 was stacked with talent. Amy Poehler, Maya Rudolph, Seth Meyers, Andy Samberg, Bill Hader, Jason Sudeikis, and, yes, Will Forte. It was a moment of transition, with Faye stepping away from the anchor desk, with the show experimenting with digital shorts that would revolutionize how sketches spread online, and with women in the cast seizing more space of themselves as central engines of humor rather than side players. Into that environment walked Kristen Wiig, who by her own account wasn't even sure she had the job until a call came telling her to pack her bags. To walk into that maelstrom of talent and expectation, and not only survive, but dominate was an extraordinary feat. And the characters she left behind remain some of the most indelible of that era. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere was not always so lighthearted. Writers and performers alike have described the SNL machine as punishing, a weekly crucible in which only the strongest ideas survive. Table reads could be demoralizing. Sketches lived or died on the whims of Lorne Michaels and the instincts of the room. It's little wonder Wiig admitted to moments of wondering if her material would even pass muster with the gatekeepers. It was in such a moment, she recalled, that she confessed her uncertainty about whether Lorne would like a particular idea, and Will Forte gave her the words she never forgot. Don't write for what you think someone else will laugh at. Write what makes you laugh. To hear it is to recognize it as a truth, both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it puts the burden entirely on you, on your own comedic instinct, and liberating because it frees you from the exhausting task of second-guessing what others want. It is, in its essence, a demand to trust yourself. That trust is what Wiig leaned on when she unveiled her audition characters, when she pushed Target Lady's wide-eyed desperation into national consciousness, when she let Penelope's compulsive one-upping spiral into absurdity, when she let Sue's manic inability to contain excitement explode across the screen. None of these characters were built to charm in conventional sense. They were awkward, often uncomfortable, and yet compellingly funny because they sprang from something deeply particular in Wiig's comedic DNA. The audience laughed not because they were pandered to, but because Wiig's full commitment made the absurdity irresistible. She was, in Forte's words, writing for herself first, trusting that if it delighted her, it might delight others. The evidence that this approach worked is overwhelming. Not only did Wiig become one of the most prominent cast members of her era, anchoring the show with recurring characters and memorable impressions, but she also became the rare performer who seemed to embody SNL's ethos of taking risks week after week. When Amy Poehler told her years later on the podcast that she had entered the show ready and confident to try her idiotic ideas, it wasn't hyperbole. That willingness to risk embarrassment, to put forth an idea that might fail spectacularly, is precisely what defined her tenure. And in comedy, as in so much of creative life, the ideas most likely to fail are often the ones most likely to succeed in unforgettable fashion. Leaving SNL was never going to be easy, but Wiig made the leap at precisely the right time, taken with her the confidence that Forte's advice had instilled. Bridesmaids, co-written with Annie Mumolo, was a flowering of that philosophy on a larger stage. At a time when the mainstream wisdom suggested that female-led comedies were niche, risky, or somehow less commercially viable, Wiig doubled down on her instincts. The result was a film that did not merely succeed but exploded, becoming a cultural landmark and smashing box office records. It was not designed to appease executives or to fit within a neat romantic comedy template. It was raucous, messy, raunchy, and deeply human, as willing to revel in bodily functions as in emotional breakdowns. In other words, it was written for the people who made it laugh, not for a sanitized idea of what audiences were supposed to want. And audiences responded precisely because of that authenticity. Bridesmaids wasn't just a hit. It was a turning point that expanded what Hollywood understood women in comedy could do. The pattern repeated in different forms in the years that followed. Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar was, if anything, even stranger, a surreal pastel fantasy of middle-aged best friends that felt like it had escaped from an alternate dimension. The film baffled some viewers and critics, but those who loved it passionately. It was a kind of project that could only have existed if its creators trusted their own sensibilities over external expectations. It was not trying to be a four-quadrant blockbuster. It was trying to make its creators laugh. And in doing so, it created a cult classic that, Again, is Forte's advice in action, blossoming years later in the wild colors of a Florida-set fever dream. Of course, Wiig's career has also included forays into more mainstream fare. Ghostbusters, Wonder Woman 1984, Palm Royale, and her work on Big Mouth. These projects show her versatility, her willingness to play within larger franchises or ensemble casts. Yet even in these, there is often a trace of her distinctive comedic fingerprint, a willingness to push awkwardness to its limit, to embrace characters that are not simply pretty or likable but strange and deeply human. Even when working within the machinery of big-budget Hollywood, she never quite surrendered the core lesson she learned at SNL, that her instincts mattered most. What makes her present choices especially interesting is how they intersect with her personal life. As a mother of twins, she has spoken about choosing projects that her children can actually watch and enjoy. Her recent role in Gabby's Dollhouse, the film, playing a quirky feline antagonist, may look at first like a departure from her usual adult-oriented comedy. But in fact, it is perfectly consistent with her philosophy. She did it because it mattered to her, because she wanted to share her work with her children, because it made sense in the context of her life. Once again, she chose not for some external measure of prestige or approval, but for her own joy and the joy of those closest to her. That is, in many ways, the ultimate application of Forte's advice, writing not for what others want, but for what resonates with you. Reflecting on all this, it becomes clear why that piece of advice has remained so potent for Wiig, and why it resonates far beyond her career. Comedy, like any art, is inherently subjective. To chase universal approval is to doom yourself to mediocrity. The sketches and films that endure, the characters that become iconic, are rarely the safe ones designed to appeal to everyone. They are the ones that sprang from a singular vision, from someone's very particular sense of what is funny or meaningful. Forte's advice distills that truth into its simplest form, and Wiig's career is a testament to what happens when you actually live by it. It is also worth recognizing the cultural shift that Wiig helped embody. When she joined SNL, women had to fight harder for space on the stage, often relegated to supporting roles. By the time she left, she was not only one of the show's brightest stars, but part of a broader wave that included Faye, Poehler, Rudolph, and others, a wave that permanently altered the landscape. Her characters were not defined by their gender, but by their oddities, their obsessions, their unhinged enthusiasm. Target Lady was not funny because she was a woman. She was funny because she was human in her desperation. Sue was not funny because she was female, but because she captured the universal experience of being unable to contain joy. By trusting her instincts, we gave audiences female characters who were as weird, as messy, and as hilarious as any male counterpart. That legacy matters. So what does it mean, then, to conclude the story of Kristen Wiig, at least as it stands now? It means to recognize her as a performer who never betrayed her own sensibility, even when it would have been easier to smooth the edges or conform to external demands. It means to see her as someone who took a simple piece of advice from a colleague and turned it into a guiding principle. It means to acknowledge that her body of work, from SNL sketches to blockbuster films to children's projects, forms a coherent whole precisely because it is grounded in authenticity. And it means to celebrate the courage it takes to keep writing, keep performing, and keep creating from that place of self-trust. There is a temptation, when writing about comedy, to reduce it to punchlines, to treat it as lightweight compared to drama. But what Wiig's story shows is that comedy requires extraordinary bravery. To stand on a stage or in front of a camera and present something you alone find funny is to risk public humiliation. To repeat that risk week after week, year after year, is to live in a state of constant vulnerability. The only way to survive that is to develop a compass you trust more than the laughter or silence of any particular audience. Forte gave Wiig that compass in a single conversation, but she has spent nearly 2 decades proving its worth. And so, as we look at Kristen Wiig today, an accomplished actress, a beloved comedian, a mother, a writer, and a performer still willing to take risks, the through line remains clear. She laughs at something first, and then she dares to share it. Sometimes it becomes a viral sketch, sometimes a blockbuster, sometimes a cult oddity, and sometimes a children's movie her twins can giggle at. In every case, it is authentic. In every case, it is hers. And perhaps that is the real lesson for anyone watching her career. The things we carry from our mentors, our colleagues, our friends may be small in words, but enormous in impact. Will Forte's advice to Kristen Wiig was only a sentence long. But in that sentence lay the blueprint for a career. And in that career lies the proof that listening to your own laughter may just be the surest way to make the world laugh with you. Kristen Wiig's story is still being written. She will surely take on new roles, perhaps write more films, perhaps surprise us in directions no one can yet predict. But whatever she does, the conclusion we can draw is that she will approach it with the same philosophy that guided her on SNL and beyond. Don't write for others, write for yourself. And if the past 20 years are any indication, the rest of us will be glad she did. Because in trusting her own sense of humor, Kristen Wiig has given us some of the most enduring laughs of our time. And in doing so, she has reminded us that the truest comedy comes not from chasing approval, but from the courage to embrace what delights us, however strange, however small, however idiotic it may seem. That is the gift she carries, and the legacy she continues to build.